So you're doing everything right. You're hitting the gym, you're tracking your macros, you're getting your protein up, and boom, out of nowhere comes a Consumer Report article to smack you right in your face, telling you that your favorite protein powder has a bunch of lead in it. You heard that right. Consumer Reports came out with a bombshell article claiming that some of the most popular protein powders have too much lead. But is this the full story? Stick around to find out. My name is Randall James. I'm a strength and running coach with 11 years of experience. And today we're dissecting this Consumer Reports article to see whether or not you and me should stop using protein powders. But real quick, if you can tell that this is going to be a banger of a video, then hit that like and subscribe button. Also, if you're over on audio, a 5-star review goes a long way towards the discovery of this channel. But with all of that out of the way, onto the video. So let me give you the gist of this article. Consumer Reports went out and bought 23 different protein powders and ready-to-drink shakes, covering everything from whey and beef-based powders to the popular plant-based ones like pea and rice protein. Each product was sent off for independent lab testing to look for heavy metals, mainly lead, cadmium, and arsenic. The results were then compared against California's Proposition 65 level of concern. That's a threshold of 0.5 micrograms per day. About 70% of the products tested went over that limit, sometimes by a lot. For example, the Naked Nutrition Vegan Mass Gainer came in at 7.7 micrograms of lead per serving. That's more than 15 times higher than Proposition 65's threshold. Another one, Huel Black Edition, tested at around 6.3 micrograms per serving, about 13 times higher. Huel is a massively popular brand right now, so this one really hit hard. Even some other mainstream plant-based proteins like Orgain and Garden of Life showed detectable lead. Not necessarily as high as those in the other two, but still above the level Consumer Reports consider safe for daily use. If you want to see every single product and exactly how much lead, Consumer Reports has a PDF of everything, so it's easy to read. I'll put a link in the description of this video. But overall, the pattern was pretty clear. Plant-based powders had around 9 times more lead than whey-based ones and about twice as much as beef-based powders. That doesn't mean they're all dangerous, but it does mean that heavy metal contamination in supplements isn't rare, and it's probably not something people think about when they're scooping their post-workout shake. Now, this sounds scary, but we need to pause. Let's bring some critical thinking into the picture. By this standard used by California, a ton of fruits and vegetables and even supplements would basically be banned outright if every state adopted this framework, because anything that comes out of the ground is naturally going to have trace amounts of heavy metals, including lead. These elements are part of the Earth's crust. Over time, rocks break down, rainwater weathers them, and those minerals end up in the soil. It's just geology. Consumer Reports even unintentionally admits this in the article in a section that was meant to call on the FDA to come up with stricter regulations around lead, where they showed this image. It says the average adult consumes 5.3 micrograms of lead daily. That's 10 times higher than what Proposition 65 says is allowable. So basically, we would need to totally alter every single person's diet to meet their threshold. But let's talk a little bit about Proposition 65. Critics of this regulation point out that the methodology used to set these limits, especially for lead, wasn't even based on food studies. Most of the data came from old workplace exposure research and a mountain of rodent studies. And if you know the hierarchy of evidence, rodent studies sit at the bottom of that pile. Also, Proposition 65 is only a California thing. No other state in the US has an oral safe limit for lead like they do. That doesn't mean California is wrong. It just means their limit is extremely conservative. But let's examine what they based their decision on. Here's the list of studies directly from their website. You can see that the vast majority of these are in rodents. These are all the data they used to come up with their 0.5 microgram number. And remember, Consumer Reports compared protein powders against that same limit, 0.5 micrograms per day. They found several above it. Here's 4. Naked Nutrition Vegan Mass Gainer at about 7.7 micrograms per serving. Huel Black Edition at about 6.3 micrograms per serving. Garden of Life Sport Organic Plant-Based Protein at 2.8 micrograms per serving. Momentous 100% plant protein at 2.3 micrograms per serving. Those were the worst offenders. Now let's play a game, a conversion game. Let's compare these numbers to the actual rat studies that the OEHHA relied on. I used multiple AIs to convert the amounts used in the studies to the amount of shakes you would need to consume to reach that same number in humans. Just to drive the point home, I'm going to focus on the lowest dose studies they included, because even those were still massive compared to anything in Consumer Reports. So just to be clear, I'm going to compare the worst lead-offending protein powders Consumer Reports found to the rodent studies with the lowest amount of lead exposure. Azar et al. From 1973 fed groups of male and female rats diets containing different amounts of lead acetate for 2 years, 10 to 2,000 parts per million. Tumors were mostly seen in the kidneys of male rats at 500 parts per million and above. The lowest dose with no kidney tumors was 10 parts per million. When they actually measured what the rats were eating, though, they found 18 parts per million in the feed. Taking the researchers at their word that this is lead acetate, not pure elemental lead, that converts to about 9.8 parts per million of elemental lead. When you scale that to a 70-kilogram human using FDA standard allometric scaling, that equals about 341,000 micrograms per day. 341,000 micrograms of lead per day. That's equal to roughly 44,000 servings of naked vegan mass gainer, 54,000 servings of Huel Black Edition, and 136,000 servings of Garden of Life and momentous protein. Fowler and Lipsky from 1999 gave male rats drinking water with lead acetate for up to 2 years. They started seeing kidney tumors at 250 parts per million and higher. When you properly scale that to humans, it converts to about 1.4 million micrograms per day for a human. That's the same as drinking the lead in about 184,000 servings of naked vegan mass gainer, 225,000 servings of Huel Black Edition, and 568,000 servings of Garden of Life and momentous protein. In Zaworska and Medras from 1968, rats ate lead acetate directly mixed into their food for up to 18 months. The males developed kidney tumors, and the females had some as well. 3 milligrams of lead acetate per day converts to about 1.64 milligrams of elemental lead. When you scale that to humans using proper conversion factors, that equals about 2.8 million micrograms per day for a 70-kilogram person. That's the same as consuming roughly 369,000 servings of naked vegan mass gainer, 451,000 servings of Huel Black Edition, and over 1.1 million servings of Garden of Life and momentous protein. Noguera et al. From 1987 fed rats food containing 0.5 and 1% lead acetate for 24 weeks. Even at a 0.5%, most of the rats developed kidney tumors. That 0.5% lead acetate in the diet converts to about 2.7 milligrams of elemental lead per gram of feed. With rats eating about 20 grams per day, that's 54.6 milligrams of elemental lead per day. When you properly scale that to humans, it equals roughly 94.8 million micrograms per day human equivalent. Are we starting to get the picture here? That's the same as over 12.3 million servings of naked vegan mass gainer, over 15 million servings of Huel Black Edition, and nearly 38 million servings of Garden of Life and momentous protein. Now, a quick note on these calculations. I took the researchers at their word that the values in these studies represent lead acetate, and I converted those to elemental lead for the human equivalents you just saw. But sometimes in older scientific papers, researchers will actually report the elemental lead content in their tables, not the lead acetate compound weight. It's honestly hard to know without going back and dissecting each individual paper. If it turns out that those measured values were already in elemental lead terms, then my numbers would actually be off by about a factor of 2, meaning you'd need twice as many servings as I just said. So instead of 44,000 servings, it might be 81,000 servings. Instead of 341,000 micrograms, it might be 625,000 micrograms. Either way, you're talking about lead concentrations that are several orders of magnitude higher. We're talking tens of thousands to millions of times greater than anything you'd find in a single serving of protein powder. And we're talking about doses that are massively higher than the average human's total daily lead exposure from all sources, which is about 5 micrograms per day. The point stands. The doses used in these rodent studies were astronomical compared to what you're getting from your protein shake. These aren't just made up numbers. These conversions were made directly from the numbers on the oehha.gov website. And remember, the rodent studies I chose were on the low side of lead exposure, meaning the other studies they used were at exposures even higher than what I'm showing you here. That's why scientists say these studies are only meant to detect if something can cause harm at extreme levels, not to estimate realistic risk of trace exposures. So in simple terms, Prop 65's 0.5 microgram is built on rat studies using massive doses you would never be exposed to in the real world. Consumer Reports found a few protein powders higher than the legal limit, but millions of times lower than the animal experiments. This is why we need modern, human-based data before setting new rules. Now let's talk about the problem with the human data that they used. Even California's own report literally says, quote, some evidence of carcinogenicity from studies of people occupationally exposed to lead, unquote. That means these people weren't ingesting lead, they were exposed in work environments, and no one can tell how much of an exposure they had. But right after that, they admit they, quote, did not find the evidence convincing due to lack of control for confounders and to the simultaneous exposure in some studies to known human carcinogens, unquote. Translation? The people in those studies were breathing in all kinds of junk, and no one could tell what actually caused what. They go on to say that later studies suggest a relationship between lead and human cancer, naming the lung, kidney, gastrointestinal tract, and brain as possible sites. But then they undercut it again by admitting, quote, the lack of detail in reporting limits the usefulness of these studies for quantitative risk assessment, unquote. In plain English, that means there's no way to calculate a clear dose response. They couldn't figure out how much lead people were actually exposed to or how much it would take to increase risk. That's bureaucratic for we don't have enough data to do this right. So yeah, the Prop 65 limit isn't based on strong human evidence. It's built almost entirely on those rat studies using absurdly high doses, the kind where the human equivalent would be drinking hundreds of thousands of protein shakes worth of lead every day. Now, do any other states have limits like this? No, not even close, zero. California is completely on its own here. The rest of the country follows the FDA's exposure guidelines, not Prop 65, and the FDA's numbers are a lot more forgiving. For adults, the FDA's reference level for lead is 8.8 micrograms per day for women of childbearing age. That means California's number is about 17 times stricter than the FDA's. Even for kids, the most sensitive group, the FDA allows up to 2.2 micrograms per day, which is still more than 4 times higher than Prop 65. So the point here isn't that lead is harmless. It's that California set its bar way lower than every other agency in the country. The FDA built its limits using modern data on how much lead actually raises blood levels in humans. Even the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, has blood lead thresholds that are much higher than what California's Prop 65 is based on. California built theirs from decades-old rat studies where the animals were getting doses hundreds of thousands of times higher than any human ever would. So what does this mean for you? First, don't panic, but don't ignore this either. I'm not saying lead is safe. It's not. This is absolutely something worth paying attention to, but it's also not something to lose sleep over. Context matters, and awareness beats anxiety. Some of the cleanest results came from Optimum Nutrition, which has been around forever, and Transparent Labs, which has really built its reputation on transparency and quality control, hence the name. These two move way up in my rankings after seeing this data. I really wish they would have tested Jocko's actual powder form and not the ready-made drinks, because I really don't drink those. It's also made me a little more cautious when clients insist on using plant-based or vegan powders. It does seem that those comprised most of the worst offenders. I'm going to push back a little harder now and inform them that they're taking a greater risk when they use those. I think this should also be another notch in the evidence that you should always be looking for labels that show the supplement you're using is third-party certified, meaning someone outside of the company actually verified what's in it and not in it. The gold standard is NSF certified for sport. That's the one used by pro teams, Olympic athletes, and the military. It confirms there are no banned substances and that what's on the label is exactly what's in the tub. Then there's informed sport and informed choice, which come from the same testing group. Informed sport is for elite athletes. Every batch is tested, while informed choice is more for everyday consumers with regular spot testing. You might also see USP verified, which is more common on vitamins and minerals. That one's all about ingredient purity and label accuracy. Another solid one is BSCG certified drug-free from the Banned Substances Control Group. They test for over 500 banned compounds, plus heavy metals, pesticides, and other contaminants. And finally, consumerlab.com, which independently pulls supplements off store shelves and tests them. They're more of a watchdog, but companies can request a test in order to get the Consumer Lab seal on their product. So if you're using any supplement regularly, especially protein powders, pre-workouts, or creatine, look for one of those labels. Because if a company won't let an outside lab verify their claims, that should already tell you something. But look, articles like this are important. They definitely expose gaps in regulation at times, and they also often remind us of how heavy-handed regulation can be. This was a sensationalized headline article, meaning most people read the headline, lead in protein, and freak out. It's never that simple though, and I hope that you're not the type of person to just read headlines and not dive deeper into an article. If you are, then I think you should just honestly stop reading news altogether, because you're easily influenced and likely telling people false information based on the headlines you're reading, which don't tell the full story. But let me close with this. Yes, some protein powders have detectable lead. No, it does not mean that you're poisoning yourself every time you drink a shake. The real story here isn't the lead, it's transparency and how little oversight supplements actually have. Your call to action is this. Number 1, demand better testing. Be loud on social media. Let these companies know we want more transparency. We want to know exactly what's in these products, and we want it to be regularly updated. Wouldn't it be amazing to live in a world where every single supplement was required to show a QR code that took you to a tested sample of their product to show you how much of certain metals and such are in the stuff you're actually consuming. That doesn't seem like it would be too expensive, and the FDA could easily regulate that. Each company would just be required to submit a report that had a sample of each product and its composition. Not a perfect system, I know, and it would be better if a third party did it, but who funds that third party? We could at least get companies to fund regulating themselves to begin with. Number 2, rotate your protein sources. Don't always rely on shakes. Yes, they're very useful in a pinch for busy people, but finding creative ways to improve the quality of your protein sources, like from beef, fish, and eggs, can only be a good thing. What am I going to do? Well, like I said, I'm strongly considering switching to transparent labs just to limit my lead exposure a little bit. So this has moved my position a little bit. And if you consume any of the worst offenders from this article, you should probably do the same. And number 3, don't panic and don't fall for headlines. As always, do your own research. Yes, sometimes you need to rely on some people to communicate information for you, but have at least a little bit of time each week devoted to fact-checking some of the things you read, especially things of greater consequence. Even me, since the beginning of this, I've told y'all, don't just take what I say at face value. Read stuff for yourself. I'm bound to get things wrong. Shit, I probably already have. But anyways, that's it for me. If you're still here watching, I really appreciate you so much. This is Always Adaptive, a business born from the idea that you're always adapting. Literally, right this moment, whether you're sitting or standing, I'm standing with great posture, I might add. My body is adapting to this right now. So control your inputs and you can control your life. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you at the next one. Stay adaptive.